morning. Good morning. I thought I was getting a response back. Thank you. Wonderful to be here. What an inspiring evening we had last night. I was just blown away to see those iconic figures up here and living history in front of our eyes and inspiring us all, really, with their sacrifices and their vision for a better world and hope. And I think hope is inextricably tied up with this idea of healing. And if there's one institution in the world that needs to take a greater role in healing our world, I think it's business. Because business has a greater impact on our lives in a free society than any other societal institution. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts this morning about the healing organization. Can business be a source and a force for healing in our lives and in society and in the world? Where for too many, it's actually the biggest source of stress, where heart attacks are highest on Monday morning, where people develop chronic diseases and they burn out and so forth. And we think that is the price that you have to pay in order to earn a living. Well, that's too high a price, and we don't need to pay such a price. In fact, the opposite can be true. We can become whole, and we can become healed through our work, if that work has meaning, and if it has dignity, and if we do it in a way where it actually fulfills and nourishes the whole person. So how can business restore our humanity and save the planet? If you think about our world today, we've made a tremendous amount of progress. There's no question about it. Especially in the last 200 years since the origins of capitalism, humanity has taken off almost on a vertical trajectory, and we have made massive improvements from life expectancy to literacy to per capita incomes, etc. And yet, if you look around in the world today, there is no shortage of suffering. There's extraordinary amounts of suffering. There are thousands of children dying every day around the world of preventable causes. There are millions, 45 million Americans suffering from debilitating anxiety. Physical violence is down dramatically, 90, 95, even 99% down compared to historic norms. Murders are down, wars are down, terrorism is down. All of that is true, but psychic suffering is on the rise. Anxiety is on the rise. Depression is on the rise. Suicides have gone up 25% in this country in the last 15 years. There's a tremendous, and it's not, by the way, restricted only to poorer countries or poorer neighborhoods, etc. This is an issue across the board. The need for healing is paramount because suffering is still widely prevalent around the world. And given that there is so much suffering, there can be no nobler purpose than for us to be an instrument of healing. I believe that is the meta purpose of our age for each of us as individuals and for any organizations that we create, such as this one, Project Hope. It's an extraordinarily healing organization, but I believe every organization at some level can be a healing organization. Because the fact is that we do need a tremendous amount of healing. We need to heal ourselves. Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Our families and our communities need healing. We need to heal our companies and our countries. This country and many other countries have never been as divided as they are today. We need to heal our planet, certainly, and all the life that is on it. And we need to heal the past. It's one of the things that I think in this country we don't do very well is learn how to heal the past. What they did in South Africa with the wisdom of Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, the truth and reconciliation process, acknowledging what has gone on in the past before you can actually build a future. And I think that's something that we need to do here much more. And that's something also that organizations need to do, recognize what has passed before we can move on into the future. So there's, again, a tremendous need for healing. And if we do not consciously choose to be part of the healing, we may actually be part of the hurting without even wanting to. Very few people actually want to hurt others, but somehow we are not mindful, we're not conscious, and therefore we do things that end up causing unnecessary suffering. Suffering can be noble if it has a higher purpose to it. But most of the suffering I'm talking about is unnecessary and does not serve a higher purpose. It simply comes from ignorance. It comes from a lack of consciousness. It comes from a lack of caring, and it's a connection to the heart when we go to work. And the reality is that 88% of Americans feel that they work for a company that does not care about them as human beings, that views them as a pair of hands or as the function or the object. They're an object on the function that they perform in the company. They only matter to that extent. And when people feel this way at work, it impacts their life. The way we lead and the way we work impacts the way we live, and therefore impacts our children. It impacts future generations. There's a dramatic impact of what happens and how it happens at work. And the fact is that even though at some level It feels like we're living in one of the most, this is the richest country in the world going through one of the most prosperous phases seemingly in its history. Stock market at record highs, unemployment almost at record lows. And the fact still remains, however, that 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank and could not raise $2,000 within 30 days if they had an emergency or a need. A car breaks down and something happens to the house, or there's a health problem. You are that close to financial ruin and disaster. And that's 50% of our population. This is not a small segment suffering in this way. In fact, 60% of American households are technically insolvent. Their liabilities exceed their assets. They are bankrupt without having declared bankruptcy. And that in an era of low, historically low interest rates. When interest rates go back to normal levels, what's going to happen? So again, there's a huge amount of suffering under the surface. There's a huge amount of stress and distress that is going on. And for the most part, we are not doing much about it. Financial stress is certainly, as I said, endemic in our system. And that is not only a cloud that hangs over people all the time and affects every waking moment of their life and their ability to sleep, but it impacts all kinds of other things, from migraines to depression to anxiety and blood pressure and heart disease and everything else, right? So again, we are literally killing people by the way we work, the way we organize. Our healthcare crisis is a crisis of caring at work. 75% of our healthcare budget is due to chronic disease. 75% of that is due to stress, and 75% of that is at work, right? So again, we have to start healing at work if we're going to heal our society. And all of the things that people go through in terms of financial stress and distress, many of these things can be avoided if we start focusing on taking care of people and putting people at the center. As Herb Keller has said, the business of business is people, yesterday, today, and forever. But we have made the business of business profit, and people as a means to that end. Profit needs to be a means to the end of elevating human flourishing. And that's what the conscious capitalism movement is really about. So as I said, most traditional businesses end up being a source of hurting for people, because people come in early in their careers, healthy, they're whole, they're over time get burned out, they become cynical, they become disengaged, and they get chronic health conditions. And does it have to be that way? Is that a price we have to pay for the ability to work? And it is not. The fact is that the human costs of doing business are unacceptably high. We put a price on everything except suffering. How much suffering goes into all the things that goods and services that we buy? We don't account for that. Whether it's animal suffering or human suffering, that goes into that. And these costs, we do elaborate cost accounting of everything that goes into our businesses, but we do not capture and we do not put a price on suffering. And here's the great irony. Even our healing professions, doctors, nurses, veterinarians, are suffering tremendously. The rates of suicide and drug addiction and depression are much higher, actually, in those professions. So we have taken even noble healing work and we have made it a source of suffering because of the way we organize work, the way in which we run our businesses. So the way we work isn't working, and we need to change that. And we believe that if it is done right, business actually can alleviate suffering and it can elevate joy, more so than any other institution in society. So this is not about setting up a healing business. It's not about saying, let's get into yoga and spas and those kinds of businesses. This is saying business of any kind can be done in a healing way. It is about business as healing. Because when business comes from a place of service, when it comes from a place of meeting people's real needs, when it comes from a place of respect and dignity and caring and vulnerability and empathy and passion and compassion, it is indeed a place that you will go and heal. Can be done. It does exist, therefore it must be possible. So how can this be done? How can business become a source and a force for healing? The great James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And the fact is, we are not facing up to this reality, the hidden suffering, the not so hidden suffering that is out there. What is our role, our culpability in that as leaders and as businesses? If we do not face that, if we do not open our eyes, as they say, you will see it when you believe it. If you refuse to believe it, so we're giving you a job. Isn't that enough? No, it's not enough. So we have to face this before we can do anything about it. And I want to share with you a story we heard from one of our CEOs that we've been interviewing for this book called The Healing Organization. We call it the parable of the pothole. So imagine that this company, we've got the white-collar professional, salaried people, and then we have the 80% of people who are working hourly in this company. It's a call center company. Instead, imagine our CFO, Chief Financial Officer, is driving to work, and her car hits this pothole. And the tire blows out, and there's some damage to the rim, etc. And so she has to pull over, call AAA, get the car towed over to the Mercedes dealer, and then she calls for another ride, gets to the office an hour late, and everybody is very conciliatory and saying, oh my God, are you okay? What an ordeal you went through. And later that afternoon, the car is delivered back to her office, nicely washed and polished. Now imagine that one of the hourly workers is driving that same highway, and her car hits that same pothole. She does not have AAA. She does not have insurance. This is going to be $700, $800. She doesn't know where that's going to come from. Has to pay for a tow truck somehow to get the car taken away, and then has to call a bunch of friends to try to get a ride. And ends up 3 hours late at work, gets called into the supervisor, gets reprimanded, gets a black mark against her record. 3 of these and you're out. And then she's told, okay, now go be nice to our customers on the phone. It's a non-event for the CFO, and we're conciliatory, we care, we are empathetic. It is a huge deal for this other human being. Nobody cares. We are adding to her burdens. Rather than recognizing her suffering, we're making it worse. And this CEO had his eyes open to this reality within his own company. He said, my God, there are 2 universes within my same company. There's the hourly people, 118% turnover, 15% engagement, and there are all the salaried people who have got 75% engagement, I've got 15% turnover. We thought everything was fine because we focus over here. And he said, we have to figure out what's going on and how can we improve the lives, and how can we help, and how can we reduce that turnover and reduce some of that suffering that's going on there. So they started a program called Dream On. It's kind of like the Make-A-Wish. They said, if you have a need in your life, if there's an emergency, there's something that we can help, please come forward. We want to help. We don't want people to be suffering. We're a family here. And nobody responded for 2 weeks because, again, people are stoic and people are heroic. The burdens that they carry around and they deal with, and they still do their work and they show up, it's extraordinary what people are doing while they are carrying around these burdens. And people have pride. And for 2 weeks, nobody responded, and finally they heard from one of the employees, and she said, I'm really sorry, but I didn't know where else to turn. My ex-husband stopped paying alimony 2 weeks ago, and we got evicted from our apartment a week ago, and my 2 kids and I have been living in a car for a week now, and I just can't do this to them. And I'm really sorry, but I need help. And this comes across, and the CEO reads this, and the only thing he feels is a deep sense of shame. He said, what the hell am I doing here? I started this company, and somebody who works for me full-time is homeless, and she couldn't even tell us. What kind of a company is this? So, of course, they immediately got her into a hotel, and then within a week, they helped her get an apartment and pay the first month and last month and all those hurdles that people have to overcome, which for many people is a hurdle too far high, which they can never overcome. And they told her, you don't have to tell others. This is okay. We can keep this confidential. She said, are you kidding? Nobody has ever done anything like this for me. I'm going to tell everybody I know. And the next thing, the floodgates opened, and so many people came pouring forward. It broke their heart, but it also gave them an opportunity to serve. There were quite a few people who were homeless. There were other people who were dealing with all kinds of traumas and, aging parents and children and all kinds of, life. And we can help, right? And of course, there's an enlightened self-interest element to it. If you do that, those people are obviously going to be far more effective and impactful and powerful at work. But you don't do it for that reason. You do it, this is a fellow human being in distress. And they're part of our family as being part of our company. Another way to heal is to challenge the dogmas and the normal ways of being within industries. So there's a gentleman here, there's a company called Jabian Consulting, and Nigel, who runs this company, is an Atlanta-based consulting firm. He grew up in the consulting industry where you're gone Monday to Thursday every week. And he said, I essentially missed the childhood of my kids. And now they're grown up and it's too late. And that's a pretty high price to pay to be a consultant. So he said, you know what, in this company, you're not going to travel for work. All of our clients will be local. There's plenty of great companies in Atlanta. We've got enough business. If we have a lot of companies in Dallas, we're going to open another office there because children are our stakeholders. The children of our employees are stakeholders in our company. Their future depends on how we operate. It is unacceptable for us to do things that will harm those kids. Too high a price to pay. And therefore, they've made this a norm now. And by the way, 3 of the top 20 consultants in the country work for this little Atlanta company now, because this matters. And most people never ask for this because they didn't know it's possible. If you want to be a consultant, that is part of the price you pay. And yet there's a consciousness, a healing consciousness from the leader that said, I paid this price. I don't want others to pay this price. Construction company in Bellingham, Washington, again, 2 men who grew up in a very brutal environment. And they said, we don't want this to be, we love construction. We don't love the way construction is practiced. And so they started a company, Ram Construction, where they made 2 rules. They told the employees, you tell us the 2 things that matter the most to you. We'll focus all our attention on making sure those things happen for you. And we'll tell you what matters to us. And please make sure that that happens for us. Employees wanted good pay and flexible working conditions so they could be there for their families. They said, OK, we're going to make sure we do that. What do we need from you? We need safety. OK, that makes sense. And we need kindness. The one thing that will get you fired in this company is not being consistently kind to others. OK, nothing else. So that's what matters. And again, started by 2 men. By the way, both of them are sons of teachers. That consciousness of the mother, OK, is the healing energy that exists within these companies. Social sadness. You know, this is a great country, but there are certain blots on our record, one of which is the prison system. Do you know that 70 million Americans have some kind of a criminal record, mostly for non-violent, non-serious things, and yet they've had to pay a steep price, and they have paid the price. The same number of Americans that have a college degree also have some kind of prison record or criminal records. They have to check that box. And for most of them, in addition to the credit score thing that John has articulated so brilliantly, is also that issue for so many people. And so Greyston Bakery in Yonkers was started by a rabbi. And he said, I want to give people a first chance. There are tens of millions of people in our country who never even get a first chance. Forget about a second chance. Because they grow up in these environments, they're terrible schools, and they're surrounded by crime and violence and poverty, and they never are able to escape that. So he said, they bake brownies for Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and they supply Whole Foods. And they said, we don't hire people to bake brownies. We bake brownies to hire people. And they don't do any background checks. They have an open hiring model. You need a job, there's a list, you put your name on the list, they go down the list. Next person gets trained and hired. A young man named Dion who came to our conference, he had tears in his eyes. He said, you know, I've been in jail 3 times, and every time I come out, I look for a job, and nobody wants to give me a job. And finally, I end up on the street doing whatever I did to survive. And this time, I found Greyston. And he said, now I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I have a job, and I have an apartment. If it were not for this company, I would be dead or I would be back in jail. This is the power of business, to lift lives, to give people opportunity. Business can heal communities. There's a wonderful grocery chain in Texas named H-E-B. When the hurricane happened recently, and every hurricane, every disaster that happens, they show up before FEMA and before Red Cross. They open within days. They have fleets of trucks. They have fleets of helicopters. They do everything that has to be done in order to serve the people. By the way, the chairman of this company, this was started by the grandmother of the current chairman, Chuck Butts. And he said to the CEO, please pay our people as much as possible. He didn't say pay them as little as possible so we can maximize profit. Please pay people as much as possible. And this is a highly successful chain that has low prices and tremendously innovative products and great customer care and does everything right. It's coming from a place of healing that emanated from the source, the grandmother. This is a company that's in Kentucky, in coal country, which is a lot in the news lately. And this young man started an IT software development company where for a while he was outsourcing all of it to India, and the offices were based in Kentucky, but then you had all these people who are unemployed. So he said, you know what, I'm going to train the coal miners to become coders. And I'm going to bring that work back from India into Kentucky, right? Because the local community now needs these jobs, and these people need a future. And he did that, again, healing that community through the power of business. Kentucky Code will do for the next 100 years what Kentucky Coal did for the last 100 years. I believe our political divide, the left-right divide in society, also can be healed through business, because it was unconscious capitalism that gave rise to militant unions, socialism, communism. Those things never existed before we had capitalism and before we had the abuses of capitalism, which was treating people like objects, the terrible working conditions, trying to maximize profit by squeezing people. It has to be conscious capitalism, putting people at the center, human dignity as a paramount value. That will then heal this divide where people don't trust business, but they look to government to rescue them, save them, protect them from business. That's never the answer. We have to heal business. We have to evolve business to a deeper consciousness. So how does this happen? It is really the consciousness of the leader. Leaders set the tone. The microcosm is reflected in the macrocosm. What's inside shows up on the outside in the organization. And so we have to be very careful who gets elevated into leadership. What is their consciousness? What's their level of emotional and spiritual maturity and intelligence? As John Kenneth Galbraith said, all great leaders have one characteristic in common: the willingness to confront unequivocally the major anxiety of people in their time. Our people have many anxieties in these times. We need leaders who are not going to add to those anxieties, who are actually going to help alleviate those by creating healing organizations. And as the Dalai Lama said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you cannot help them, at least don't hurt them. And I'm afraid we're doing a lot of that. We are hurting a lot of people in the pursuit of profit. The great and sad irony is that we would actually make more profit and we would be more successful if we heal the people and take care of the people, because it is people ultimately who make any business succeed. And you know, it is later than we realize. In Martin Luther King's phrase, there's a fierce urgency of now. And in the play Hamilton, there's a song about Alexander Hamilton in there about he wrote 31 Federalist Papers in 6 months, right? And the question was, why do you write like you're running out of time? Write day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight. We are running out of time. We don't have the luxury of time. This is an urgent situation. We have to do something about it today. So ultimately, it's about the people. If we take care of the people in every dimension and take care of help them take care of their families and their children, they will take care of the business. But that's where it begins, by taking care of the people. Thank you very much. And again, very happy to be here. And thank you, John. Thank you.